1. A night without stars. The thief named Jack moved in the shadows. The night was starless, the moon hidden behind clouds, leaving the city streets in a frightening darkness. Jack picked a target, an old mansion on the outskirts. The house looked abandoned, but rumors varied. Some said there was treasure hidden inside. Others said no one ever came back from there. 2. The entrance to the darkness. The lock on the door was rusty and gave in easily. Jack stepped inside, sliding silently across the cold floor. The smell of damp and something else more putrid hit his nose. There was absolute silence inside. 3. The unseen gaze. He pulled out a flashlight, but it flickered on and off. The thief cursed to himself. The darkness around him seemed alive, as if someone was watching him from the corners of the room. In a hurry, Jack decided to search the first floor so as not to linger. 4. Traces of the past. There were old newspapers lying on the floor and faded portraits hanging on the walls. The faces were blurred, as if someone had intentionally erased them. A chill ran down his spine. He looked into the first room, where there was dusty furniture, all covered with sheets, but on one of them was the distinct imprint of a human hand. It was fresh. 5. The first sound. There was a low rustle. Jack froze, peering into the darkness. Could it be just rats? But then there was a sound no rodent could make, something like a low, muffled laugh. 6. Stairs up. Jack decided to go up to the second floor. He treaded carefully on the creaky steps, trying not to make a sound, but with each step, the feeling of unease grew stronger. He felt not like a thief, but like prey. 7. Corridor of shadows. On the second floor, a long corridor led off into darkness. Along the walls were doors, all half open. It looked as if someone had just peered through each of them. At the end of the corridor stood the only closed door. 8. Voices outside the door. Jack listened. There was whispering behind the door. The words were indistinct, but he heard his name clearly. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He'd never said his name, and no one was supposed to know he was here. 9. Opening. He touched the doorknob and it slowly turned on its own. The door opened, and something moved in the darkness of the room. Jack's eyes gradually became accustomed to the gloom, and he saw 10. The occupant of the house. A figure sitting in the corner, thin, with long arms and a head bowed to the side. She was smiling, her lips stretched unnaturally wide, exposing teeth as sharp as needles. She whispered, "You came on your own." 11. Escape. Jack rushed back toward the stairs, leaping over the steps, but the corridor seemed longer than it was. The walls were closing in, the doors disappearing. He ran toward the exit, but when he reached the first room, he saw that the front door was gone, just a smooth, old wall. 12. The house closed. A quiet chuckle was heard behind him. Cold fingers rested on his shoulder. The last thing Jack heard before he disappeared was, "You're one of us now." 13. Disappearance. The next morning, the house stood as it had before. No one had seen Jack. No trace of him had been found. But now, if you looked through the windows, you could make out a figure standing motionless in the shadows, waiting for the next guest. 1. Goodbye. Danny's parents were in a hurry. The suitcases were already stacked by the door, the cab waiting outside. "Be a good boy for Miss Ellie," Mom said, kissing him on the top of his head. His father ruffled his hair. "We'll be back in 2 days, son. Love you." Danny nodded, watching his parents disappear out the door. He was left alone with the babysitter. 2. First night. Ms. Ellie was kind. She made him macaroni and cheese and let him watch TV late into the night. She smiled, but something in her eyes seemed strange, dark. As he got into bed, he heard a rustle outside the door. Opening it, He saw a mess. Ellie in the hallway. She just stood there looking at him. Is everything all right, Danny? She asked, her smile growing wider. He quickly closed the door. 3. Whispers. Waking up in the middle of the night, he heard a whisper. The voice was thin, intermittent, as if someone was speaking from another corner of the room. Danny, are you alone? It whispered in the darkness. He turned on the light. The room was empty. 4 shadows under the door. The next morning, Miss Ellie acted as if nothing had happened. She asked if he had slept well. Danny remained silent. Later, when he was playing in his room, he noticed strange shadows under the door. They moved as if someone was standing behind it, though he couldn't hear footsteps. 5. Broken toy. In the evening, he found his favorite toy car broken into 2 pieces. He didn't remember breaking it. When he showed Miss Ellie, she only smiled. Things break, Danny. Sometimes things disappear. He didn't know why, but those words startled him. 6. Disappearance. On the second night, something woke him up. Silence. Absolute silence. He walked out of his room and found the house empty. Miss Ellie was gone. Danny called out to her, but all he heard in response was his own echo. Then he saw the door to the basement open. The light from below flickered. 7. The basement. He went downstairs. The air was cold and smelled damp. In the far corner of the basement stood Miss Ellie. She was motionless, her back to him. Miss Ellie? He whispered. She turned slowly. Her smile was now unnaturally wide and her eyes were completely black. Now you're going to stay here too, Danny. 8. The return. My parents returned the next day. The house was empty. They looked for Danny everywhere. They called the police, but he was nowhere to be found. Everything in the children's room was still there. Only on the bed was his favorite toy car, good as new. And in the basement, in a dark corner, someone was laughing quietly. 1. The road to nowhere. Lenny drove the old bus, lulled by the monotonous hum of the engine. Snow-covered fields and sparse houses whizzed by outside the window. He hadn't visited his grandparents in a long time. His parents were always busy, and now they'd sent him away alone. You'll get some fresh air, Mom said. Grandma will be glad. When the bus stopped, Lenny stepped to the curb. It was quiet all around, too quiet. No people, no dogs, not even the wind. Only the trees creaked under the weight of the snow. 2. Where is everyone? The village looked dead. The houses stood dark. The windows were empty eye sockets. There wasn't a soul in the street. Lenny walked down the main road, peering into the houses. Empty. It was as if no one had lived here for a long time. His heart sank. Where were the grandparents? Why wasn't anyone there to greet him? He knew he was in the right village. There was a well by the central square, and a familiar house with a peeling blue door. Only the door was ajar. 3. A cold house. It was dark and cold inside. It smelled of damp and something else, a thin, stale odor. Lenny called out to his grandmother. There was no answer. He went into the kitchen, a moldy plate of uneaten food on the table, as if someone had just disappeared in the middle of dinner. There was nothing in the house but old furniture and musty air. A family portrait hung on the wall, but something about it was off. The faces of the grandparents seemed blurred, as if they had been erased. Lenny stepped closer, and at that moment the door to the attic creaked open. 4. There's someone upstairs. The stairs led down into the darkness. Lenny climbed slowly, clutching the phone in his hand. The flashlight's light trembled. Upstairs smelled damp, and the boards creaked menacingly underfoot. In the far corner of the attic stood a closet, the only piece of furniture among the dust-covered boxes. The closet door was ajar. Lenny froze. Something stirred inside. Was he imagining it? Or a faint sound came from the closet, a scratching sound, as if someone inside was running his fingernails over the wood. 5. They disappeared. Lenny rushed downstairs, nearly falling. His heart was pounding. He sprinted outside, looking around the dark houses. There were no footprints in the snow, not his grandmother's, not his grandfather's. It was as if they'd never lived here, but that was impossible. He remembered them, their voices, their laughter, the smell of grandma's pies. But all the houses around here were abandoned, the leaning fences, the dark windows, and the longer Lenny looked, the more he realized that this place was long dead. But then, who had he talked to on the phone yesterday? Who was waiting for him in this house? 6. Uninvited guests. Night found him at his grandfather's house. He locked the doors, but he couldn't sleep. There was a rustling sound outside, as if someone was walking slowly in the snow. Then a scratching on the door. Lenny held his breath. Slowly he stood up, trying not to make a sound, and went to the window. There was someone standing in the courtyard, a tall figure, wrapped in long, dark clothes. Her face was hidden by a shadow. She didn't move, it just stood there. Then the figure slowly raised its hand and pointed at him. 7. Run. Lenny screamed and rushed toward the back door. The cold air hit him in the face. He ran without looking back, through the snowdrifts, through the dead village. The wind howled, the snow blinding his eyes. He heard heavy footsteps behind him. The road led into the forest. He didn't know where he was running, but the trees were better than staying in this place. 8. Don't turn around. He hid behind a tree trunk, trying to catch his breath. There was a ringing in his ears. The forest was dark and the branches creaked, but no more footsteps could be heard. Lenny slowly peered out from behind the tree. A figure stood in the distance. Its dark face was torn by an eerie, unnatural smile. You shouldn't have come here, a voice whispered in his head. 9. Missing. The bus pulled up to the abandoned bus stop in the morning. The driver waited for about 5 minutes, but no one got off. No footprints in the snow, no voices, just an empty, dead village. Lenny never came home.